furniture on and sit on the porch. Is there a way that you can, I mean, can that be done? Putting a fairly, a porch that's big enough to be a social type room, can that be put on a very small house? I guess it depends on the house.
Yeah, I mean, there are actually some fairly simple houses that have huge porches around them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I would think it could be done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would depend on the house.
Like you said, just a matter of scale, you know, and that's a lot of it. You can, I think the planning part is where it's all at, you know. It's, you got to really think it out.
To build a much bigger house around the little house, and then you can put a porch in.
Yeah, right.
I've got a couple examples in the audience. Janet Reed and Jane Kelso are two people. One is Janet Reed. I pretty much did a small little porch on her front of her house, which made a big difference. And Jane Kelso, we're going to be doing a little restoration on her front porch. And both these houses, without those porches now, especially Janet Reed, she had nothing. She had just a set of precast steps. And it's just an old-style farmhouse. It's not a fancy Victorian. But by putting that front porch on, it made a big difference as far as how that house appeals to you from the curb. Jane Kelso's got a porch, a small house with a fairly decent-sized porch as compared to the size of the house, but I can't imagine that house now without that porch on it. So, you know, we're just beginning. Next week I'll do some tear out, and we've just got to decide on the columns for proportion. And that brings up a good case of what they have now, what they manufacture in columns, are all sort of predetermined now based on a railing heights for code. It used to be that the turn portion of columns were longer in the old columns. Now the pre-made columns, which are a colonial style, are actually smaller, and they give you a larger base at the bottom for 42 to 36 inch rail. So it messes it up when you have a porch, say like Jane's, which has a small rail detail in front. So you have to actually kind of, you know, look around, and you have to really think those things out for scale.
Yeah, I want to add something relative, just going through now, to rails. If we follow the current IRC, the International Residential Code, rails, if the difference in height is more than 18 inches, the rails actually have to be, I think, 39 inches or high. I need to discuss this with Lauren, but at least in Cedar Rapids, in many instances, when we had things like that were in conflict with what would have been historically correct, the city of Cedar Rapids at least has backed off in many cases, saying that's fine because there is historic precedent for it. So I need to do some legwork.
I think he's willing to work. He works with me on that.
Typically he has, and I think that's so. Keep that in mind. If there's a problem, you know, if you have a problem with that, make sure you come to us, and we'll try to help you out. If you have a historic house, if you got a new house, we can't help you. You pretty much have to do it according to new things. But if there's if you're in a historic house, and if the building codes would force you to do something that would be contrary to what was historic in that house, then a lot of times we can get exceptions to the building code.
So in our discussion, you know, what Rev has covered and what Ed has covered, a lot of these things, you know, right away I think, oh, you know, I know what he's talking about, or that's a case on a porch that I did. But whenever you do a porch restoration, you have to consider the cost initially, either in paying someone else or using your own resources, your time and your money to restore your own porch. And you know, Harold Cruz was an old lumber dealer here. And some of the people here remember Harold Cruz from 30 years ago. He owned Cruz Lumber, which is now Gordon Lumber. And Harold always used to say that the front porch, the porch of a house, was the most expensive room in the house. And of course, not in your house, but he always say it was the most expensive room in your house because based on just depending on what detail you'd like to go to and the maintenance end of it. Because porches fail due to whichever, either you're too close to the grade, or you're not using the correct material, or you're not maintaining the paint or linseed oil or whatever on that porch. So you've got to be prepared for maintenance whenever you have a porch. And I think if you're willing to get on a maintenance schedule in maintaining things, keeping the trees and bushes away, repainting, you know, other things, making sure the drainage is correct, you're gonna keep your porch in a lot better condition. But that's easier said than done because you kind of forget about it because it's outside the house. But going back to two cases, Janet Reed, when I came to Janet Reed about a year or so ago, she wanted to redo her little front entryway, and Janet got on her computer, and as she did with her addition some years ago, she really planned that out. And that makes a big difference as far as when you're going to do something. If you just sit down and really think about it and plan it, either if you're going to do a restoration or if you're going to add something, it really helps the contractor with pricing and with direction. You know, she had a computer printout and the whole deal for me, so I knew exactly what we were doing. It came out like she wanted it to come out. Now, Jane, her porch is already there. What we have to do is some classic examples of what Ed was talking about. The deck is too close to grade. Flower beds were built up almost directly against the skirting. Those things are things we're going to have to deal with, and she's going to have to deal with after I get the porch restored. We'll replace the flooring. It is completely gone, so we'll tear that up. We'll replace the structural members with a treated. And by the way, as far as treat is concerned, I've had some very good success. In fact, we did a porch 20-some years ago, and a new person bought it, and he wanted to redo something. So we pulled some of these treated posts out. And these treated posts, 20 years later, they were set in the concrete below grade. We were able to pull them out, the pier and everything, with a machine, cracked off the concrete, and those piers were fine. That's 22 years ago. They were buried in concrete, and drainage was fairly decent around them. So the treated is going to last, I think, minimum of 30 as long as you have some decent drainage. So as far as your substructure, you want to stick with a treated, a CCA, pressure-treated southern yellow pine material. That's real good. So because you can get different types of treated, and you want to go with a southern yellow pine, I found to have the best success with. When you go ahead and then get your substructure, and of course before that we'll refer back to the concrete footing. And most of the old porches, you'll see, all they did, a lot of the old timers did, was they take a couple of pieces of limestone, dig down a little bit, flatten the ground, and they set a couple of limestone block down there. Many porches in town are set that way. And they lasted for many, many years. And a lot of that still is related to drainage. But what we do is we'll go ahead and pull those out. We'll dig the 42, which is minimal, and then we'll go with usually about a 12-inch pier underneath those. You can get what they call a sonotube from Menards. They will form a nice little cardboard top. You can go ahead and put that, set that at top, get your level on there, and pour your concrete, and then you'll come out with a nice pier at the top. And that gives you a good structure. We'll usually bring up a piece of re-rod and set the post on that a lot of times to give you some lateral strength on there. One thing that a lot of people don't like is the idea of the concrete sticking out. So what we'll do is just cover with grade, and those are one of those, the technical, what you should actually do and what actually gets done a lot of times is based on look. And therefore, you've got to be prepared for some problems if you decide you want look more than function. And that's one thing. When you talk to certain people, the design is more important sometimes than the function. So you have to be prepared for problems if you are more design, in certain aspects, design oriented than functional. I like the function. I think it should be done a certain way to give you a long lasting porch, or in any case, any design or wood construction. But in a lot of cases, people like the design aspect more. So be prepared for some rotting or whatever, but you just have to know that might happen. So a lot of cases they covered today on these porches, the one where the long wrought iron, that was Steve Moritz, that's right, Steve Moritz. That was a classic example. The Garsts used to own that house. It was a classic example of somebody just really destroying the front of a house. And now with the house, Steve came to us and wanted that redone. It really is, to me, a classic example of what you can have on the front of your house. And it was really a true joy to see that as the final, when it was all done. So the porches are from a just a aesthetic aspect here in town. They really are important, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, they help me make a little money too, so I'm prejudiced in that way. My own house, I'm on a kind of an ongoing project on mine where there was no wraparound. We wrapped it. We put a big screen porch, and gosh, we get a lot of use out of that. It really is functional. And you know, my wife really thought a lot about that, you know, and she's still thinking about it. So someday I'll get it done. But we use it a lot, and it really makes her happy, and it has both the social aspect and the functional aspect. We use it for the kids, for parties. Cornell, we had a reunion for my class, and we had 50 or 60 people on the wraparound porch and in the screen porch. So it really has a lot of function, and it's a very great social aspect. So I guess I can talk all day, but if you have some specific questions, I might be able to answer them. Are there anybody that has some ideas? Or I know Steve and Dixie are thinking about a front entryway on their house.
I think it was just a portico stoop, and it never had a real porch. But we don't know that. I've never seen a picture of it.
Well, you know, when we did one on the south side of town here for Robert and Lisa Megan, they actually had an old picture of that front porch, and they wanted it exactly. And we did. That was the one where we did 45 the bottom of all the spindles, you know, and it was really a help when you have a picture of what you're going to do. You know, either you plan the picture or you have a past picture of it. That really helps the contractor and give you some idea of what it's going to look like. So that will definitely help. I like the example of on A Avenue, the porch you showed, which is a classic example of a fellow who's put a lot into his home and spent a lot of time on it. So, but the final result is really amazing. You know, when you see what porches look like. I remember Abby's house from when Rick owned that years ago, and now with that front porch on there, it's just, I mean, I can't imagine that house without a front porch. Janet, now you put a little front entryway, it really looks like it should be there. And I think as far as just the aesthetics, I think they're very important for the aesthetic value of the house. But it's still, you know, you have to temper that with the cost, and you know, that's how you go about deciding whether you want to do this on the front of these houses. Guy, I know you've always had, there's always maintenance on your porch. You know, it's an older porch, but you're going to have that, and you accept those things when you have those. And, but one of the things I liked, Rev's, what was it? The snout look, was that what he's called? A lot of the newer homes don't have that appeal, and I've always lived in older homes, and something about them is the feel, and it is one reason why years ago when I came to Mount Vernon, I decided to stay here because of the feel of the community, the college, the atmosphere it presents, and then it's reflected in the homes. And another comment we get at our house, we get a lot of bed and breakfast guests, they say, you know, people are always working on their homes in Mount Vernon. And that is something that I've really seen over the years. There's always something going on or a plan going on for most of the homes here in town. So I think we should continue that, but you know, of course, like I said, I'm prejudiced a little bit. So as far as getting materials, this is a great inventory of things here, but I've been doing a little bit of reading lately. I just was reading a book on scale as far as columns are concerned. And one thing we're doing with Jane right now, she wants to replace the columns. She has basically a 6x6 turn post. But her roof is very low on that house, low porch roof. So what we're trying to do now is, based on what's a readily made turn column, we're going to try to make sure that we can get that scale right, because like I said, the turn portions now are different size. They're like 8 inches smaller as far as the turn part. So now we're going to try to decide what looks good with a different column. Either we're going to try to work with what they have and see if we can adjust things so that it looks right. But that is, if you're going to do your porches, the look is right. You got to have the right look, and that's the only thing I would really recommend to people when you're doing porches, to make sure they look nice and that everything flows. And you've got great resource material, and here in town, you know, with the historic preservation, there's a lot of people you can talk to about that. So I've trying to think of some good examples. Like I said, Megan's on the south side of town was a good example. Janet's on the north side. We've done Steve and Sue Maurice's house. A lot of them I've got to go back into my inventory of thought here and see how many we've done over the years. But the main thing is that the problems are usually associated with these are the footing for the columns and the column themselves. Because around that column usually is where moisture settles, and then there's rot in the porch, which are usually, what we use is usually a tongue and groove fir flooring. And there is the big problem for most of your porches when they start going. And also the point of the ends of your fir flooring. When they come out, you have the problem with that Abby has, that moisture sucked back in, and they start the rot process. So if you can, when you put those boards down, what I use is Cabot's is a very good clear sealer. I've used that on my deck. It really holds up good. But if you can even just linseed oil the ends, if you're going to paint that, as soon as the porch is put on, linseed oil the ends, linseed oil up underneath, and if you're not going to paint for a while, at least keep some linseed oil on those to prevent that water from sucking into the ends of that end grain, in the end grain. That's where a lot of the problem is. But the columns, you see a lot of rot in the columns. A lot of it is
Before you get past
Sure.
the linseed oil, can you just immediately paint it then after you put the linseed
no,
oil?
usually let it set a few days. We want to let that stuff dry in. Now in Jane's, we're going to go ahead. In her case, you can get 1x4 tongue and groove fir flooring. What they have now is a cost factor. You can go ahead and get a finger jointed one, where they have them finger jointed. They're not a solid long piece. I decided, we talked about that, we didn't want to do that. So I'm going to get straight, number one, or I think it's number one tongue and groove fir with no finger splicing. Because if you're going to paint that, I still feel that you should have a clear span board with no finger joining. I don't like that idea. It's still strong structurally, I guess they're the same strength, but from a long-lasting aspect, I like the just straight, no finger joining. So that's one thing I like. The detail of overhangs important to make sure you get that so that water doesn't suck back into there. And the columns, boy, you can go all different ways with columns. We've done them where, as Ed said, you put your 4x4 inside and then you wrap around. That's what we did in Maurice's porch. That was a wraparound detail. And we actually contoured the boards. They were not straight up and down. There was a contour on them, so like that. So, and they contoured to the top. So that was a nice detail. Brick columns, what we've done in a lot of cases is we'll go ahead and set our footing. We'll build a brick column up and then set your porch on those brick columns. I did that on my home, and we've done that on a couple at Steve's and a couple other homes we've done that. That's a real nice look when you have a brick column or stone column. I think Steve's were stone, and mine and a couple other we've done have been brick. Real nice, but you always want to make sure you have a good footing. That's where a lot of these porches start to sag and fail, is because of the footing. So, trying to think of some other interesting details. The scale, like I said, I was reading about scale as far as the size of the posts here a couple weeks ago. They showed pictures of people with small, say 4x4 or even 6x6 columns as opposed to a 8x8. Big difference as far as what the scale looks like and how the appeal is from the street. So those are some things you want to take into consideration. Skirting, you saw some excellent examples of skirting, and we've done a couple of real intricate ones, but they really make a big difference in the bottom portion of that porch. And that's something that a lot of times what we've had homeowners, actually we set them up with the jig and a jigsaw, and we'll cut one out and they'll go ahead and draw it out or do it themselves. So there's some ways you can save money by doing it yourselves if you want to spend the time. So trying to think any other thoughts? Sure.
I have a question on, nobody's mentioned gutters on roofs. Just my personal case, I have a building gutter, a metal roof, and it's failing through the eaves and getting rot in those areas. And obviously I have some tree issues, but then if you add gutter, you architecturally really ruin that 4-inch cold molding that's at the front.
What's the rest of your roof? Is it a shingle or is it a flat rubberized roof, or it's a metal roof all the way? Well, you can repair those. I mean, you can put in areas where that metal has failed. You can get a metal, and actually a lot of times the bending process is just a matter of bending it over a 2x4 or something, or a sharp edge. You can actually get that in there. We've done it where they've got some great caulking for gutters where you can put a patch on that area, and then just paint it right back in. So in a lot of cases, part of the problem with built-in gutters over the years, same thing, it's just maintenance. People just forget about them. And then, of course, then tree leaves drop in, they eventually rot. I guess from a visual aspect, I'd rather have a built-in gutter than a wraparound or a box-style D or just the old half-round even there. I just think if you can maintain them, that's the way to go. But they're time-consuming. Those are time-consuming to do, but they can be done. There's there's materials that you can use for doing it, and caulking that will hold for many years. But like I said, you got to be prepared for some maintenance down the road.
On porches, a gutter, unless it's a huge porch, gutters aren't as critical. Right, because number one is you're not, on a house, when the water comes off a house, it's dropping right near the foundation or the basement, which is a problem. Usually in a porch, you're already removed from the basement, so that's not an issue per se, and usually we're dealing with a much smaller area. The key there would be, where people enter the porch, you might want to put a cricket or something to help direct water so it's not coming down on people as they enter the porch.
Well, there's definitely materials you can use to patch that in, I've done, a lot of them over the years where, short of ripping everything up and redoing it, you're going to be more cost-effective to patch in and use some of the good caulks, and they'll last for many years on that. So, Jane, did you have a question?
Yeah, you and I haven't had a chance. I haven't had a chance to mention this to you. Probably when I do, you'll say, "Oh my God." But one of my plans or dreams has been to have a small Victorian gazebo where the little storage shed is right now.
Right.
Mostly because I thought the house is so small that would visually enlarge the house and have it be an extension of the architecture.
This is in the backyard, right?
Of the porch, yeah,
Yeah.
where the little eyesore of the storage shed is
Right.
now, to the kind of north and back just a little bit. And our Nick was home last weekend, and we were just talking about what you're doing. And he said, "Well, Mom, what about, wouldn't it be convenient or handy to have some stair steps going down the back of the house, the back of the porch?"
Sure.
So there you have a wraparound porch
You go back.
with
Sure.
with a little stairway. And I just wondered how authentically, historically authentic that sort of thing would be.
I wouldn't see a problem on your house because, first of all, it's going to be hidden towards the back, and you can incorporate it real easily into your porch there. That's not a problem. I mean, that's not a big deal for those. You just have to consider, your steps, and then probably put a couple of footing down low for the stringers to settle on, and then, of course, a rail to go down the outside part. A lot of times on those where you're going right up against the house, we only put a rail on one side as opposed to both sides. You really don't need it on the house because you can always, if you have to, use the house as a, hold on to. I'm trying to think, is that the end of your house back there? It goes farther back than the porch, doesn't it?
No, the house keeps going.
Yeah, that's right. So you don't have a problem there. I think that'd be, my wife wanted one on ours. When we wrapped around, she wanted stairs going out to the back porch for the kids, so we put a set of steps there. Yeah, that's, I think, great, and then not a real big cost addition, so it's, yeah, as far as multiple entries, I think that's kind of great where that porch is really more functional as opposed to just one entry from the front. If you can get, multiples. When I did my screen porch, my wife wanted a door cut in, so we cut a door from our parlor into there, and then I just put a little transom to try to match the height detail of the windows inside. It came out great. She had a great idea there, and we were able to use the old window, the top of the old window. I was able to actually use that whole detail, just cut it down, and use that for my top detail inside, so it works out real good. And another thing too for a lot of these, you want to make sure you're staining and like on the interior, get a good stain match. I use Clingers. They have a great department for matching stains. Bring a sample in and stuff like that. So a lot of these, they look so much better, these porches look so much better when you try to really get down to some of the little nitty-gritty details that the homeowner can do. A lot of times, the contractor does, it's going to cost you. Those little details that you can do yourself, they're going to probably get done faster, and you're going to get them done more reasonably. So, Janet.
I am to that point now with paint.
Yeah.
And I'm having trouble picking out a deck stain
I don't want to walk up on that deck and have my footprints on there.
Right.
And I don't want to be doing it every couple of years.
I think Cabot's, I've used Cabot's through Diamond Vogel, and I'm real pleased with that's an old company, probably 1840s or 50s. So Cabot's, and they're available through Diamond Vogel. And it's a clear stain that can be tinted, and really good, it's real good quality. Cabot's is a good, when I used to live in Chicago, in the late 60s, I worked for a guy there who used Cabot products, and I still do. They're a really good product.
And the grain would be coming through?
You'd have to
Or
see a
would
little
it be-
grain. If you want the grain to show through, you can get solid hide, but usually I recommend a semi-transparent on a case like that. Although, I've had some good luck with just solid hide stains. A lot of times they say, we did a home on 3rd Avenue. A professor, he just moved into a home there, Ron and Jennifer Deniston. And I don't know if you noticed, they had a fence all the way around that. And here's another case of not correct technique. When they built that fence, they didn't use correct technique as far as fastening. And of course, when this was all done, all these holes were there. They puttied all these holes, and of course, you've got 1,000 different holes, and they all started popping. So they had to come back and rebuild that whole fence in a correct manner so that you didn't see all those fasteners, because all those fastening holes are one more place where, and they, of course, putty them on the outside. It's, if you can avoid that, you want to avoid that. You want to be able to take that extra little bar to fasten the top of your spindles or whatever from the top so you don't see the fasteners. And there's a classic example now. They used the wrong kind of stain on it. They used a latex stain that just didn't hold. I'm still a big proponent of oil-based products. As long as your wood is dry, you should have minimal problems as opposed to some of the latex products when you're going to go like on decks. I used a solid hide oil stain on those when we built those couple little decks on their house, and no problem. Within a year, the latex failed on the porch or on the fencing there. So you want to try to stick with those, make sure things are dry, and use high quality. It pays to spend a little more. Use a product like Pratt & Lambert or Cabot's. They go farther and they last longer as long as the application is right. You don't want to rush things. That's a lot of it. So, but I would recommend Cabot's or P&L. As far I use P&L for 30 years now, and I've never had any major problem with that product. So, trying to think some other good.
What do you recommend for if you're painting your porch floor and they get really slick?
Well, you use a gloss paint. Of course, a deck paint is polyurethane based. You're going to have that. Some people will add in a little bit of the texture. You can add that texture in there, but you want to make sure that floor is sanded good and is ready to accept that. Because what happens is, the intercoat peeling is the big thing. I think it's worth it, to be truthful with you. If you've got multiple coats on your deck, a lot of times you can call a floor sander, and they can sand that down. They'll sand that stuff off. If you can get it sanded off, boy, it's sure, and you can start over, it makes a big difference. Sometimes, though, you look at the old floors and they've been there 60, 80 years and they've just lost all their heart. You just got to start over. So, but in a lot of cases, it's a matter every couple of years you're putting another coat on and it peels. So you're better off starting over again and getting it sanded down. But I think if you can get a floor sander, they're going to be in and out in there in a day usually. They kind of grumble about porch decks because the oil-based paint gums up their pad. So you may be paying a little more, but boy, considering what you'd have to do to get that off, it's worth it, Or you have to put up with every couple of years you got to repaint. So it's a maintenance issue. It boils down to a maintenance issue. Yes?
Because I was going to say, Klingers does have a porch paint, floor paint that is non-slick, but it is going to be, your traffic areas you're going to have to do every 2 years.
Yeah.
We have it on our cushion, and it is nice.
Yeah, but it's still a maintenance issue because, boy, imagine being outside with, a millimeter of cover on your skin all year long. I mean, your wood gets beat up. So I like to actually, that's why I use the Cabot's, was because it's a clear sealer and you don't have to worry about buildup. But in some cases, you want to make sure that, from a aesthetic value, you want to have the porch painted. For me, I like the old fur exposed, and as long as you keep the ends covered, or sealed, excuse me, you can maybe hopefully keep that porch longer. So, But I've torn off some that have been there 60, 80 years. So, you know, they've done pretty good when you really think about it, so.
On the proportion of your porch stairs, aren't they typically more horizontal, the proportion than inside stairs, in that your rise isn't quite as tall as the inside stairs?
Yeah, well, I still like to go by the old formula, you know, of what they say, between 17 and 18 inches overall, where you have, say, a 10-inch, you know, you have a 10-inch run, you have you say a 7.5 to 8-inch rise. You still want to stay within that for comfort levels. So what you end up having on most porches is when you get to the bottom, you may have a shorter step. And that's, you know, that's just the way it works out a lot of times, unless you can landscape to get the perfect number, you know, between your deck and your ground. So you always want to figure, you know, your 7.5, 7 3/4, 10 to about 10, 10.5. And then at the bottom, you do your short step. That's really the way to do it. And then you have a very comfortable step. Comfort's important, you know, in any step, interior or exterior.
Exterior steps are typically always shallower, in other words, shorter with longer rise than interior, just because it's assumed that the rate of movement is faster, and therefore that kind of step is more conducive. And by building code, you're allowed a much higher, steeper stair inside than you are on the outside.
They still, I know now Lynn County still wants you to stay, we did one here out in the country, out on Springville Road, and the inspector wanted it at 7.5, 7 3/4 for that. I mean, you know, so you got to check on that. In town here, you know, Lauren's very willing to work with people on restorations. That's one thing, you know, as far as rail height, you know, when we're talking historical significance, they're willing to back off, you know, as far as that's concerned on the older homes, which is really important because I can't imagine some of the homes with, like, you know, high rails on them. Just it would look, you know, it would look really bad. So in other cases, you know, it looks fine. So it's depending on a lot of times how you're looking up at the porch, you know, you can't pick that up if you have a little higher rail on there. But the only thing I've, you know, learned over the years from just personal experiences is it's a lot of work in porches. But when they're done, they're, you know, they're a great addition to the home. So, and a lot of it, Guy, go ahead.
My porch is old, and I know most of the supports are on the old limestone blocks underneath, and I'm going to replace a couple this summer. My concern is about jacking up the porch enough to get the old support out and maybe go with a different block underneath.
Right.
How do you do it, or are there some real risks if you're starting to jack the porch up?
Well, usually you want to bring it to a point where you're just relieving stress from that below. So we've got some bunch of old screw jacks we bought years ago, and you know they're big, you know, rated for several tons. So what we'll do is we'll make an area below the grade, and we'll clear out an area, tamp it real good, put some block in, and cover it with some plywood, and then set those screw jacks in. Then you'll go ahead with either some 4x4s or 6x6s off the top of the screw jack, and then go with a 6x6 across that area and span whatever amount of, you know, floor joists you need to span. And then you just do just a little bit of crank on each one. Everything's slow. You don't want to go real fast on those type of things. But usually screw jacks are the best way to go as far as taking the pressure off that porch and not pushing it. You don't want to go way high, because if you're moving the floor and your column is still sturdy on the floor, up above, then you may be pushing, you're going to be pushing against your upper roof a little bit. So you want to watch it. Another thing you want to inspect is to make sure that the floor is stable, make sure that the column is stable, because we've seen cases where you start to do the jacking process and you're actually crushing the floor joists up into the deck material. Because, you know, a lot of times you're right under, like I said, right under the columns is where most of the rot is. So then what you have to do is you switch to going on the outside, going up to your main beam. You can still use screw jacks, but then it starts to get a little more complicated, because then you have to get some 4x4s, and then what we'll do is put a plate on top of the 4x4 and get up underneath the beam, both sides, or possibly just one side, and then screw jack it up. You know, that's a little trickier application. Or you can use regular, they've got post jacks. You can actually get on the deck, support underneath, you know, underneath your floor joists with the screw jacks, put a beam across, get on top, put another 2x12 down, and then set a post jack on that, and then put a board on top of that post jack and pull up or push up on the roof structure. So you just have to think this out because everything carries through. If you're structurally, good down below, you should be able to push everything up. But in most cases, if you're going to restore something or get it out of there, it's because there's rot. So you got to be real careful when you do that. But screw jacks can be rented in Cedar Rapids. I'm pretty sure they still have those. There's always post jacks you can buy, but I think those are viable too. And a lot of times, you can just get double 2x6s, nail them together, and wedge them. Put a plate against it and wedge them on the ground. But you want to make sure your ground is stable. You've got it tamped good and put a board down there. Maybe put a couple block under it, and then wedge up against the area. So there's a couple different ways you can do that without. You don't have to rent the jacks, but we like it just because we've got them. We've used them all the time. But for the homeowner, you can just go ahead and wedge, get some 2x6s, nail them together, double them up there, and then put a board up underneath the beam and then support it. And then that loosens everything up. But it's not as easy because then you got to hammer in, try to push up. But if you can relieve some of the pressure, then you can knock that column out of there and then start over. Because I'm assuming you've got probably is the column and the deck above it gone, or you don't know at this point?
I think the biggest problem, over the years, the water off the roof has caused the soil to move away, so now it's running back under.
Yeah.
So it's wet under there. Yeah. I need to first.
And so it's settling.
Yeah, I need to first get the soil back in so it can't run under. But
right.
Once I get that done, then I'll want to get a new block and a new post back at the correct level and just redo it. But I'll put in a larger block. I think I saw last year somebody was doing a porch and there's a precast, fairly good-sized block that has a hole for a 4x4 right in it.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. There's so much stuff out there.
So
if you can get into these
really
books.
Stable, and there's either Menards or Home Depot that has it.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of
be a good form for me, rather than trying to pull enough porch off that I could drill the 42-inch hole.
Right. Yeah, a lot of that is just, you get your post hole digger and you get in there and you can dig that stuff out. Because a lot of times the old timers did, when they say they don't build them like they used to, in a lot of cases it's darn good that you don't. Because, I've seen situations where, there was no engineering at all. In a lot of cases there was no common sense. It was just, hey, honey, I'll get this done this weekend, and they do it, and then there's other cases of homes here in town that were built to last forever, and so, you're going to run into that. So, but when you go, it's just a personal choice. How far do I want to go? And that's, then that runs into time and money, so, for those things, so. And I don't know how long you want me to go here. It's 11:15.
Well, that's probably good enough unless we're ready to do the wall.
Okay.
The porch wall. Right?
Well, here you got a wraparound porch, and she was talking about a little trim under the board up there, and this has got brackets as well as the delicate little spindle treatment. But notice it's not the same as the spandrels down below. See, it's a little slightly different. It's a different pattern, and it's more delicate. And of course, one of the interesting features of this house too is the pediment over the porch is decorated, very highly decorated. But this is the way they screened that in, that area in, is really quite nice. It's not offensive at all, not intrusive to the whole porch. And screening one portion of the porch rather than the whole porch was fairly popular for a while. A lot of people now want to do screen in the whole porch, but this is it's a nice little living area that's sort of, again, off the family room. See, there's another door over here. That's a door into the family area. The door into the front is the company door. That's going to take you into a receiving hall. But when the family came back from town or school, they all went in the side door because you kept that kept the receiving area clean all the time. So when people came, you didn't have to worry about the house being clean. Everybody in the house just moved around that receiving room or lovely sitting room in the front of the house here.
One thing to note on the screen, and you see the little cutouts on the bottom, they remembered that they needed drain holes.
Yep.
Because moisture's still going to get in there, and it's got to have a way to get out. And people sometimes forget that when they enclose it or put screens on it, and then you got a rotting problem right there, a contact point. So little subtle things like that
Yeah.
sometimes
Well,
get forgotten.
Yeah, and as Jim was saying, you know, when you put a board, anything on the bottom there, make sure you've got, you know, it's up off the ground. Otherwise, it's just going to suck moisture right up, the moisture from the ground, from the porch. And there's an area right in there that it doesn't have a gutter. You see that?
Oh, yeah.
So that's really important, that lower area, you know, be up high enough off the ground to keep the moisture from coming right up into that board, and then it'll go into the rest of the grandest porches, I think, in town, simply because of the elaboration of a basic structure with the brackets and the various baluster or spindles and up and down. You know, here's one of the things that Jim was talking about is you know, access to the porch rather than just one entrance. There's a second one here. Now notice it's an entrance up. You can go right into the family entrance, the family door. So you don't have to walk clear around the house to get in the house from the back, from the yard, so to speak. But again, you know, it's going to be, access is very, very convenient. Up the door, up to the porch, make a sharp right, and back into the house. See, they use a different pattern here on the side porch. Nothing has really been changed much in the inside. I think the kitchen has been remodeled, and that's about it. It's never been painted. The lumber dealer, Soper, built that house. Okay, let's go on up the street this way. This is essentially a pattern book house. You know, it's a number of pattern books that I've seen. So they're going to see houses almost identical to this in a lot of places in Iowa. But, you know, here you've got a brick foundation on that house. It's not wood, it's sitting on brick. And then you've got a brick pillar and then the column. So and that's sort of after, that becomes quite popular around 1905 to 1915. And the smaller porch, of course, is those spandrels are very simple. Yeah, this home, of course, you've got these very massive pillars, the three of them. And, you know, for a long time I really wondered if those were original, but I think they are. We've got some early pictures. That's what, Smedley?
Yeah, I was just saying, if you notice the pier on the right, underneath it, it's void. I mean, it's like they're mostly ornamental.
Yeah.
Whatever structure was there is a very small component.
Here you've got essentially historic concrete steps. Is that what we have?
Yeah, right.
So you might want to consider that. But,
Yeah.
you know, concrete is appropriate in some situations for steps.
Well, you know, this, there was there are these little sort of movements that go through homeowners. You know, when I first came to town, everybody was painting their number on the curb, the street number on the curb, you know, because people, you know, sort of thought that was neat, and you could, you know, go to the hardware store and you got the little number thing and you just spray painted them, you know. But, you know, this is another one of those, the cement step. That's a very steep slope on that porch. Now, it has settled some, but when you see the step, it hasn't settled an awful lot since the cement step was put in there. But obviously this homeowner had to, you know, could go to the lumber yard and you could have your name put on your step and your number. But that porch is covering a bay window. And the bays are usually covered with porches. That's one of the things in terms of spotting a house where the porch is gone. You see a bay window without a porch, and that's going to be a pretty good sign. Take another look. Well, they did some, but not very often. They're going to cover that bay with a porch, sun angles, etc. It's especially when you see this is a south-facing house, so all year long you're going to get a lot of sun. In the winter, that's kind of nice because the sun drops low and you get nice light into the house. But most of these houses that we're looking, a lot of these houses we're looking at are built in the pre-electric era, before electricity really began to become a factor in internal design. So that's they're going to maximize the light, and that's what the bay does. It maximizes the way the light all day long. You're trying to bring natural light into the house because anything else you got is a lamp.
Wouldn't it make a difference also where the bay is located on the house? Where this is on the front door,
Yeah,
I think
right.
when
No,
Dixie's talking
well, no, on the
it's
side, yeah, on the side bays, no, but on the front,
That's on the front. The bay's on the front.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, there's a 3-window bay in the front living room.
yeah, but usually those are covered with a porch, as I say, for shade and for protection.
And this is that example of the porch that never had a rail on it either.
Right,
So.
right.
Regan's house here. It's not often that your top mirrors the slope on the porch either. I think that is settling, or was that built that way?
No, I think it's settling.
Yeah.
I think it's settling.
It's kind of disconcerting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but it hasn't settled much since
You know,
in
the
the
columns
last
look
30
like
years.
they're perpendicular, but the,
Yeah,
you know, just,
yeah. That's a good point. But and that's not the original skirt. You can tell that. Let's just take a look at this one here. Now you need to be right about here, because I'm gonna put this house back together for you. Now that is a porch restoration. For many, many years, this house did not have a porch, and on the side here, under the window, was a door into that living room. And it was a full wraparound porch. And it was 2 dimensions. You know, see, that's much shorter this way from the wall to the edge than it is from the front from the front of the house to the outside. But in terms of a design that's compatible with the house, it works. If I hadn't pointed that out to you, you would say that's a pretty decent porch. As a decorative element, particularly, that really works. Rich Rockroar did that, and I've helped him with it, and we took some pictures of porches from around the area and sort of fabricated this one. And then he eventually fabricated the little corner trim pieces, the little brackets, and they're really quite nice. But that's a total reconstruction, and then he used the same sort of fleur-de-lis pattern you see on the bottom as he used on the brackets. But there again, we're talking about you know, a top trim there would have to be very delicate, even if you took those 2 of the corner brackets out.
So the door, where it is now, was where that window, did you say where that
No, right
it was
under the
back.
window here.
Under
It's a wraparound.
yeah.
It came back in.
Back where the-
Again, it's a company door in the front, the family door on the side.
The one thing I might point out here is this might be one of those situations where they kind of have a problem maybe starting on that corner where it's not getting enough light, those bushes
Yeah.
growing up over it, and you kind of see it's awfully close to the ground, and it already looks like there's mold going up that skirt a little bit, so
Yeah.
you know, there's a potential problem that is threatening their new porch.
Yeah, it is indeed. Now this is a total reconstruction, but we had the porch outline was there. I had the spindles, and the full walnut ones are the little short run from the house out to that first fourth pillar. So if you really want to see the original ones, they're that little run across on the left.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, sure you did. You know, we started to talk about restoration stuff. You know, we started with this, we're going to replace the flooring, which was really bad. It had separated, you know, to where it was just not good at all. And when we started into that, we suddenly realized that the problem was also with moisture problems on the bottom. And this was a porch set on limestone slabs, just a piece of limestone. So it was actually very uneven, even though it didn't look too badly. So, you know, we took the whole thing off, redid the supports across the what do you call them, the joists, Most of the joists were replaced. New floor, the whole thing. We fabricated the spindles from the original, and we created the skirt, which is the style that skirt was. I had 3 or 4 pieces of it. And we figured out how to how to get the slope, which is quite interesting over here, because it drops considerably. Now making all that come out so that the holes are all on the straight side took Rich Rockworth's physics ability to figure, and math ability to figure that out. I didn't try that. We did block put blocks below the donuts on the bottom. Those were made, but the porch posts are original. They're the same posts that were there. You'll notice this one, because of the way it's painted, the little red underneath the soffit there. That's a cove molding, and you were talking about sometimes you'll find these cove moldings on porches. Well, that's a good example of it.
An example of a festoon also.
Yes, we have a festoon.
What are those made of, Dick?
What?
What are those made of?
Which? The
The
donut?
festoons.
Oh, the festoon.
I think it was.
Now, these are, you'll see them up on the top, and on the porch. And I tried to make a mold of one of those, and then was going to work with resin and sawdust, because that's what they're originally made out of. And his daughter picked that up and made several to restore them, which is exactly what needed to be done. But you need to be careful when you do things like this when you're an amateur. They're all nailed at the top, and then there's nailed in the back to a board to hold them together. A two-sided porch, and what that they filled in the left side, took the door out, and made a room out of that, and then took the front off. Well, you can see what they tried to do to create at least a sense of entry. But it's a long ways from the whole original dimension.
Maybe in the 20s or 30s when they.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because this is 1910. This is, when you see any of these like this, it's from one photographer who sold these to people, and I have a copy in that house, just inside the door of the original of that house. Now that house, my former home also has the company family door on the side, and if we were going to screen that in, we were going to screen in, that portion right up to just a little sitting area.
To the edge of the corner of the house.
No, from the edge of the house to the first pillar,
Okay.
like the other one.
Yeah.
So, that would be the screened-in area that we were looking at. But again, it's a west porch. And, now these trees are nice and big, but when we bought the house and put these trees in here, it was just, that heat was just incredible.
Well,
In
in the
spring
morning,
and
but not in the
fall, in
afternoon.
spring and fall in the afternoon, it would be pleasant to see.
Yeah, well, that's when I'm working. Porch with replacements where necessary, and then they rebuilt the bottom.
Explain why, is there a reason, is it supposed to look like the bow out area on it? It looks like the porch goes in there, the floor goes in. Is that just an optical illusion, or?
Well, it's either an
Or is that
optical
just a
illusion or a
problem?
mistake. Yeah, right. No, and you can see the first bowed area coming out here. Notice that it's you can see how it slopes up. And then, yeah, it's quite a slope. I was pretty surprised they weren't able to bring that down a little bit one way or the other. But it's nice to see here. See this whole area? This area came out. That's now would have been over the garage, and they just moved this whole area back on the lot and created another house. Now,
Yeah, just never.
why would anybody want a house like that in Mount Vernon?
Was it ever used as a boarding house?
Absolutely, sure. That's exactly what it
Close
is.
to
It's a
campus.
boarding house. It's a block from campus. You bet. Yep, you bet.
Separate entryways.
Yep, for students. Yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sure is. The whole bump out on the front is gone.
Yep, I looked at this for a long time. Frank Finish, who was living right on the brick house when I came to town, was a lifelong resident. He kept telling me about this, and I You know, I kept being very skeptical until I really got into the details of the house next door, and that's the house. I mean, in other words, that is, this house was on that site.
Yeah. Well, it kind of explains why that lot for that house is so small.
That's
back
right.
there, too.
That's
That's
right.
very odd for that
Did
lot.
they actually move that back portion of the house, or just cut out everything in between?
Well,
See,
that's a good
that's a good point,
You
yeah.
know, it could be.
This is all gone back.
Right,
back
it's all
there.
gone in here. So you know,
Oh,
it
no,
makes.
it's not. No, it's not. I mean, isn't that?
Yeah, that's still.
No,
That's
here's,
still there.
that's-
That part's still there.
No, this is your roof line here, right here.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
But I mean,
Right.
See, I think,
the back part is what I was
the
talking about.
reason
Yeah,
it was built
right.
like that was you
And
had
then
the
that was
family
just
lived here,
Right.
and they boarded.
I think.
Two wings of the house.
Look at the dirt streets.
Yep. Yep.
With the little Packard little car.
Yep. See, and that's not this photographer who did all these. What you see, this signature is about 1910. There was not a porch on that house when I came in '67. I lived in the Beaker house for a while. The college owned it at that point. But they, you know, that was at least put something back, and it was one of the first attempts in the area about 1970 to try to put a porch back. And you notice the whole concrete floor. That's just a whole huge concrete slab. So it's you know, no effort was made to do anything aesthetically. It was just something, we got to do something. Original. It shouldn't be too hard to tell that, because look at these fish scale shingles on the second floor. So that's going to be the 90s, we talk about the 1890s to 1900s, and that's not a porch that fits that period at all. It's more the porch of a little bungalow from the 1920s and 30s.
Well, the porch originally was a gingerbread porch, and you can see the post that's on the back, the half post on the porch. And the porch was torn off, I think in the 80s, early 90s, and it was falling apart, and the owner at that time decided to pull it off. And then in the 40s, 60s, they altered the porch, and I don't know if they had rot problems or anything, but it was like the siding there, but it was not enclosed. And so when we redid it, we found all the gingerbread markings of the brackets and the house post on the front of the house, you know, where they lived. So, and how we found the old porches, it's a good example. I went up to Cornell, and the early yearbooks, this was a boarding house, and just happened to have a picture there of the people sitting on the porch on that section, and we caught and you could see the window of the door. And then also, it was another example of, then you caught the houses behind, to the side of the house, to see how original they were. And this was in the 1910s that these pictures were taken. So, and then also when you tear a porch off like that, you know, we've had problems with water underneath the front porch, because it, you know, it's not away from the foundation now. We have to do some landscaping there to remedy that.
Sometimes you get some surprises when you're taking it off, because sometimes when you have things that were boxed in later, sometimes the original posts are actually there still. They just boxed them in and, you know, took the support off of them. So sometimes you do find the original stuff.
Yeah, and he did save the other half post, and we found that in the garage, so that was nice.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have is, if we were to put back a porch like that, is it typical with those large windows like that to have that trim at the top of the window?
Yes.
Even inside the porch
Yes,
area?
under the porch area. You can look at any of these, and if you get up close to them, you'll see that there's a splash rail at the top of them.
But the reason I'm asking that is it doesn't look like, you know, if you brought the porch line across, that you'd actually be below that splash rail. In other words, that porch is almost going to have to go higher.
Well, the porch roof will be just over that splash rail.
The ceiling board.
Yes.
Right.
The ceiling boards would come right in there. You can see that on, as I say, numerous houses in town. This is a gorgeous porch over here on this corner, and it is original. Notice the cement stone, imitation cement stone pillars on that, but that's a lot of roof. Like the holding it, it's got to support a lot of roof, so it's nicely designed. Probably one of the reasons that it stayed so well. I don't think that's the original skirt at all. You have a nice little second floor porch, and there again you see the use of the little spindles at the top, right underneath the overhang there, and then a different pattern on the lower rails, and that's a porch off of a bedroom. There's a whole theory about these little porches hanging off here. I have two that I can document in Tipton that are designed primarily off of a closet, and they're to get fresh air into the closet.